House Oversight hearing room was suffocatingly tense, a furnace of quiet hostility and unspoken rivalries. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras already rolling, their lenses catching every flicker of movement. The polished oak tables reflected the soft glare of overhead lights, while aides whispered urgently behind stacks of papers. The topic was supposed to be straightforward: federal disaster relief funding. But the room pulsed with something darker, an undercurrent of anticipation, as though everyone sensed a storm gathering. At the center of it sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. Calm, composed. Her pen tapped gently against her notepad, steady, rhythmic, betraying none of the restless energy simmering beneath her stillness. Her dark eyes scanned the room with the calm focus of someone who knew the rules of the game and had already decided she wouldn't play by them. Crockett had faced loud, dismissive men before, the kind who mistook her directness for anger and her intelligence for arrogance. But this moment was different. This time her opponent wasn't some blustering congressman. It was Senator Elizabeth Warren herself, fiery, eloquent, and unafraid to go for the jugular. Warren had requested to testify that day, arguing that the House committee had mishandled the investigation into the allocation of flood relief funds. Her office claimed millions meant for local rebuilding efforts in Louisiana and Texas had been delayed due to bureaucratic mismanagement. But what most didn't know was that Crockett had been quietly digging through financial records for months, uncovering strange reroutings of funds, some of them tied to projects in Massachusetts, Warren's own state. When the gavel struck, the room fell into silence. Chairman Comer looked down his glasses, gave the standard procedural opening, and then nodded. The chair recognizes Senator Warren. Warren stood slowly, smoothing the sleeve of her navy blazer. Her eyes burned with a mix of conviction and calculation. She held a thick folder, papers sticking out in every direction, evidence or the illusion of it. Congresswoman Crockett, Warren began, her tone sharp but civil. The American people deserve answers. While Louisiana drowns and Texas families struggle to rebuild, you and your committee have remained silent. Millions of dollars in relief funds have gone unaccounted for. Why? Are you too tied to your political allies to speak for the people you claim to represent? A murmur swept through the chamber. Reporters looked up. Phones began recording. The first strike had landed. Warren continued, her words growing sharper, her volume rising. Families have lost their homes, their businesses, their lives, while this committee buries reports and delays hearings. I find that disgraceful. And I, for one, won't sit silently while public servants turn their backs on their constituents. A small burst of applause came from a corner of the gallery, a few of Warren's supporters, eager to signal their approval. But most in the room stayed still, their eyes flicking toward Crockett. They wanted to see what she would do. Jasmine didn't move. Her pen stopped tapping. Her lips curved slightly, not in a smile, but something sharper. She knew this was a setup. Warren was here to make a spectacle, to force her into a defensive posture under the glare of national cameras. But Crockett wasn't built for retreat. When Warren slammed her folder shut and leaned forward, the tension snapped like a wire. Answer the question, Congresswoman, Warren demanded. Why have you been silent while communities in your own region begged for help? While children drank poisoned water? While families slept in cars? For a moment, the silence was absolute. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then Crockett rose slowly from her seat. The motion was graceful but deliberate, like a queen standing to address a court. She adjusted her microphone, her movements unhurried, her gaze steady. When she spoke, her voice was calm, rich, and clear, the kind of voice that carried truth like thunder. Senator Warren, she began, before you question my silence, maybe you should look in the mirror and ask yourself, where were you when Louisiana was drowning and Texas was begging for federal help? Because while you were busy clinking glasses at Georgetown fundraisers, I was wading through floodwater in Houston, listening to mothers tell me how they lost everything. The room went dead still. Warren's face paled. The words hit like a physical blow. A reporter in the back let out a gasp she couldn't suppress. Crockett didn't stop. Her tone hardened, but her expression stayed calm, almost surgical. I've been out there with the people. In the neighborhoods the cameras forgot. You can't say the same, Senator. You're here today pretending to speak for the poor and displaced. But your office signed off on redirecting nearly $2 million of relief money to a cultural arts project in your own state. A project that, far as I know, didn't lose a single home to floodwaters. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several senators shifted in their seats. Chairman Comer froze, his hand halfway to his gavel. Warren blinked rapidly, her jaw tightening. "That's an outrageous accusation," she snapped. "You're twisting facts. My office had no—" "Oh, I've got the facts," Crockett interrupted coolly, holding up a stack of documents. "Signed transfers, dates, federal signatures. All right here. And you can call them outrageous if you want, but the numbers don't lie." Reporters were already typing furiously, their phones lighting up with notifications. The words "Crockett confronts Warren" were beginning to trend within minutes. Crockett lowered the papers, her voice softening but gaining weight with every word. "This isn't about politics, Senator. It's about accountability, about families who are still waiting for clean water, for a home, for the government to remember they exist. And you used them as a backdrop for your speeches, then left them behind the moment the cameras turned off." Every word landed like a hammer. Warren tried to interject, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You're grandstanding," she said. "You're trying to twist this hearing into a personal attack." "No, ma'am," Crockett said quietly, her Texas drawl sharpening like a blade. "I'm trying to make sure those families get justice. The only personal thing here is your conscience." The chamber was frozen. Every camera zoomed in on the two women, one standing tall and unyielding, the other visibly shaken, her composure cracking. Crockett didn't gloat. She simply gathered her papers and placed them neatly on the desk. "You talk about fighting for the people," she said. "Maybe it's time you actually meet them." And with that, she sat down. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. The chairman didn't dare speak. Even the cameras seemed hesitant to break the spell. Warren's lips parted, searching for a retort, but none came. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her papers. Across the room, a young congressional aide, barely out of college, wiped away tears. She'd grown up in Houston. Her family's home was still half repaired from the floods Crockett had mentioned. Within minutes, clips of the exchange exploded online. Hashtags like Saj Crockett claps back, Warren exposed, and Truth in Congress began trending across X and TikTok. One viral post read, "Elizabeth Warren tried to lecture Jasmine Crockett about compassion, and Jasmine just handed her a lesson in reality." Another said, "Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She just told the truth," and it echoed louder than any speech I've ever heard. Meanwhile, in Louisiana and Texas, televisions flickered with replay after replay of the confrontation. In shelters and community centers still scarred by flood damage, people cheered. For once, someone in Washington had spoken for them. At the end of the hearing, as the gavel fell, Warren's hands shook as she gathered her notes. She didn't look up. Crockett, meanwhile, stood slowly, smoothing the crease in her jacket. Her eyes found Warren's, not with malice, but with the calm certainty of someone who had just said what needed to be said. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you stand by your remarks?" Jasmine paused at the microphones, her expression composed. "I don't deal in remarks," she said simply. "I deal in truth. The people of this country deserve leaders who show up when it matters, not just when it's convenient." And with that, she walked away. Back inside, Warren sat alone for several moments, staring at the empty chair across from her. The hum of conversation returned, faint and distant, but in her ears. It was drowned out by Crockett's voice, calm, steady, and unforgiving. That single sentence. Where were you when Louisiana was drowning and Texas was begging for help? Would replay on every news network that night. It would light up social media feeds, spill across headlines, and ignite conversations at dinner tables across America. But for Crockett, it wasn't about headlines. It was about the faces she'd seen. The mothers in Houston, the children in Beaumont, the elders in New Orleans, people who had been ignored for too long. And as the echo of her words rippled through the country, Jasmine Crockett knew this was only the beginning. She had thrown the first stone, and the walls of Washington were about to tremble. By dawn the next morning, Washington was burning, not with fire, but with headlines. Crockett versus Warren, the confrontation that shook Capitol Hill. Warren, Accused of redirecting relief funds. Documents. Emerge. Texas Congresswoman. Stunned Senate with calm takedown. Cable news anchors. Replayed the clip so many times that it started to feel like a scene from a political thriller. On social media, the split-screen image, Warren's furious expression frozen beside Crockett's steady gaze, became an instant meme. In the quiet of her office, Jasmine Crockett watched it all unfold. She didn't smile. The victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like vindication, the truth finally clawing its way to daylight after months of silence. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists asking for statements, party leaders offering strategic advice, supporters flooding her inbox with messages of pride and gratitude. But the one message that mattered most came from a name she hadn't seen in years. Ms. Daniels, Houston. It was a mother Jasmine had met during one of the flood site visits. The text was short, almost trembling in tone. "We saw you last night. You said what we've been screaming for years. Thank you." Crockett exhaled slowly. That was why she had done it. Not for the cameras, not for the sound bites. For them. Across the city, however, in a glass-walled office on the Senate side, Elizabeth Warren was in freefall. Her communications team huddled around her, voices overlapping in panic. "We can get ahead of this, Senator. Just say the transfers were administrative. Deflect to FEMA. We can issue a joint statement with the Treasury Department." Warren slammed her hand against the desk. "No joint statement," she snapped. "This woman ambushed me on live television. I'm not letting her turn me into a villain." But deep down, she knew the damage was already done. Crockett's calm truth had cut deeper than any insult could. By noon, a bipartisan ethics inquiry had been quietly announced. The Oversight Committee was now investigating the allocation of disaster funds across multiple states, Massachusetts included. The very hearing Warren had tried to dominate had turned into an inquiry that now had her name at the top of its docket. When Crockett arrived back at the Capitol later that afternoon, the atmosphere was electric. Staffers who'd barely acknowledged her before were now nodding respectfully. Even a few Republicans, who had often been her harshest critics, offered quiet congratulations in the hallway. "Hell of a showing yesterday, Congresswoman," one of them murmured as they passed. About time someone spoke plain truth in that room. She didn't respond, just offered a faint nod. Praise didn't matter. Accountability did. That evening, the hearing transcripts were released. They told the same story millions had already witnessed. A senator caught off guard by a congresswoman's unflinching honesty. But buried in the fine print were the real bombs. The financial records Crockett had mentioned on camera were now public. The redirected funds were real. Networks exploded. Investigative journalists pulled the threads further, revealing a web of questionable transfers tied to political donors and nonprofit partnerships in Massachusetts. Nothing illegal yet, but everything unethical. By the third day, Warren's approval ratings had plummeted. Her allies went silent. Her usual defenders on talk shows stumbled through vague statements about miscommunication and procedural complexity. Crockett, meanwhile, stayed quiet. She gave no interviews, no press conferences. She showed up to work, did her job, and let the truth do the talking. But late that Friday, as the Capitol dome glowed under the night sky, Warren appeared at her own impromptu press conference. The air was thick with tension as she faced the reporters, her voice brittle but steady. "The allegations against my office are being misrepresented," she said. "Congresswoman Crockett and I may have our differences, but I have always acted in good faith. If any procedural errors occurred, they will be corrected." Someone shouted from the crowd, "Senator, do you deny redirecting funds to Massachusetts projects?" Warren hesitated. "All allocations followed federal guidelines," she said, her tone clipped. "I have nothing further to add. It was the wrong answer." That clip aired immediately, and within hours every commentator in the country was dissecting it. Her hesitation was replayed in slow motion. Analysts compared her shifting posture to body language studies of guilt. The damage deepened. In her district, Crockett was met with applause and gratitude. People who'd never cared for politics now knew her name. She visited Houston again that weekend, not as a politician seeking headlines, but as a daughter of Texas, standing amid the people she'd fought for. At a small community center still under repair, she was swarmed by residents. "You did it, Congresswoman," one elderly man said, gripping her hand tightly. "You made him listen to us." She smiled softly. "We all did," she said. "They can't ignore us forever." Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood by the bayou, quiet, reflective. The water glimmered with orange light. Behind her, children laughed, splashing near a rebuilt park. Her aide, Malik, stepped up beside her. "You know this isn't over," he said gently. Crockett nodded. "I know. The investigation's going to dig deep. You might get pulled in too. Warren's team will try to paint this as political warfare." She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "Then they'll find out I don't fight for politics. I fight for the people who can't afford to hire a lobbyist." Malik smiled faintly. "And that's exactly why they're afraid of you." The following week, the Oversight Committee convened again, this time with the eyes of the entire nation watching. Warren returned to testify, her confidence brittle, her speech rehearsed. The senators beside her shifted uneasily, aware the tide had turned. When it was Crockett's turn to question her, the room held its breath once more. "Senator Warren," she said calmly, "last week you accused me of silence, but I've learned that silence sometimes isn't complicity. It's preparation." She leaned forward slightly, her tone precise, her words slicing through the hush like glass. Preparation to uncover the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Preparation to face the reality that good intentions don't erase bad decisions. Warren fidgeted. "Congresswoman, I've already stated—" "You've stated a lot," Crockett interrupted gently, "but you haven't answered. And the people back home, the ones whose lives depend on this funding, they don't need statements. They need accountability." For once, Warren had no retort. The exhaustion in her face betrayed everything. Afterward, as Crockett exited the chamber, a reporter shouted, "Congresswoman, what message are you sending to Washington with all this?" She paused, her steps slowing. Then she turned slightly toward the cameras, her expression calm but resolute. "That the truth doesn't need permission to be spoken," she said, "and that no title, no position, no political legacy puts you above the people you serve." That quote would echo for weeks. In the days that followed, the ethics inquiry confirmed that the funds had been misallocated, not criminally but negligently. Warren was officially censured, her influence quietly diminished. She remained in office, but her voice carried less weight. Meanwhile, Crockett's name was suddenly everywhere: interviews, op-eds, late-night talk shows. But she kept her distance. She wasn't chasing fame. She was building something larger: credibility, respect, and an unshakable reputation for truth. Late one night, she sat alone in her office reviewing more files. Not about Warren, but about other ongoing crises. Contaminated water in Mississippi, housing inequities in Florida, new flood risks in Oklahoma. The fight was far from over. She glanced up at the window, the Capitol dome gleaming in the distance. Its white glow reflected off her eyes, a symbol not of power but of purpose. The phone on her desk buzzed again. Another message from Ms. Daniels. Just 3 words this time. "We still believe." Jasmine smiled quietly. In the marble halls of Congress, where ambition often spoke louder than conscience, a new voice had risen, and one that refused to be silenced, one that carried the weight of every family forgotten in the margins. And though the cameras would eventually move on, the echo of that voice, calm, fierce, and true, would linger in those halls for years to come, because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just confronted a senator. She'd confronted a system. And for the first time in a long time, the system blinked.